Hi there again, and welcome to another episode of the Grade 12 Geography Cap series. I'd like to thank you for tuning in, and I hope this will make geography as simple as possible. Right, so in this video, we'll be taking a look at different river profiles, fluvial processes, the different stages of a river, and also the resultant land forms. And we'll also take a closer look on the landforms, meaning which at the end of this video you should be able to explain how the associated landforms form, be able to identify different types of landforms, be able to differentiate between river profiles, be able to describe fluvial processes, and also explain and describe the different fluvial processes that occur in the different stages of a river. Right, so far guys, we have covered all of the concepts that are under drainage systems in South Africa. So this is the subsection that we'll be looking at today, but for this video we will cover river profiles and also identification and description of fluvial landforms, meaning which the next video will include river grading, rejuvenation, river capture, and superimposed and antecedent drainage patterns. So this means that there are really a few concepts that are left until we complete the section of geomorphology. Right, so without wasting any time, let's get on to it. Right, so river profiles are simply the view of a river. Okay, so when you're talking about a river profile, you are referring to a particular view of a river. Now, there are two different views of a river. We have the transverse profile and the longitudinal profile. Now, you have to be able to differentiate between these two. You have to be able to define these two, right? So they are quite simple, really. So the transverse profile, if you remember quite clearly, I once mentioned the transverse profile in the tropical cyclone video, where we said that the transverse profile is also called a cross profile. And so we use these words interchangeably. It's either I say it's a transverse profile or I say it is a cross profile. Okay, so a transverse profile, when it comes to a river, it is a view of a river from one bank, okay, to another bank of a river. Now, a bank is simply the ground that is at the edge of a river, or the land that is at the edge of a river channel, right? So we're saying that a transverse profile is simply that view of a river from one bank of a river to another bank. Okay, so we say it is a bank to bank view of a river, right? So whenever you see this view of a river, then know that is the transverse profile or a cross profile, right? And then we have a second type of profile, which is the longitudinal profile. I'm sure you are aware of this one. So the longitudinal profile, this is a view of a river from the source to the mouth. Okay, so this is basically a side view. Okay, so this is what you would see if you would look at a river from the side. So this is what we call the longitudinal profile. It's from source to mouth, whereas the transverse profile is from bank to bank. Okay, so now guys, these are not difficult. I'm sure you can tell the difference. That's all we have to know here. Be able to differentiate between your transverse profile and your longitudinal profile. Simple as that. Right. So now a river has processes that are a result of the relationship that the flowing water has with the river channel. Okay, so we call these processes fluvial processes because they are river processes. Fluvial refers to river. So fluvial processes are simply the physical interaction that flowing water has with the channels of the rivers and streams. Okay, so as water flows, there are processes that occur at different stages of a river, and those we call fluvial processes. Right, now, I got this information from the self-study guide. If you can Google Geography Grade 12 self-study guide, you should find this document. It has all the information that I provided here. So there are simply three major processes that we identify during the course of a river. Okay, so the first thing that occurs is erosion. Okay, the removal of materials. Okay, so that should have been materials. Right, so that's the first process that we see, the removal of materials. I remember describing and talking about erosion in the previous video of drainage densities. So if you haven't watched that video, please check it out, guys. It's quite informative. We're saying that this is the first process. Okay, we remove materials. Okay, we remove all of that soil particles, rock particles. We are removing all of that material off the soil, off the riverbed. We are taking that off the soil. This is what we call erosion, the removal of material. Okay, it's simply that. Okay, when water flows on top of the soil, it tends to remove material off the soil, okay, or off the rocks. Okay, so now you have these particles or material or sediment that you have removed from the soil. Okay, so that's the first step. And the second step that generally occurs is that this flowing water transports this removed material in a process that we call transportation. So now the removed materials are carried away by the flowing water. Okay, so after it has removed those sediments, these sediments are now going to flow with the flowing water. In this way, they are being transported. So we see transportation, that's the second step. We see transportation of this removed material. Okay, which means that it is basically carried away with the flowing water, heading to where the flowing water is heading towards. Okay, right, so that's the second step, transportation of this eroded material. The third step, or the third fluvial process that we see, is deposition. Okay, so deposition, guys, this is simply when the material is being dumped. Okay, when you go deposit money at the bank, you sort of dump in the money there at the ATM. Okay, so you put in money there and you leave it there, right? So that is deposition is as simple as that. Okay, so when you deposit something, you actually dumping it or placing it there. And so that is exactly what happens. And what is being dumped here is that material that was removed, right, from the soil, and then was transported. So after transportation, this material will now be dumped. Okay, so this usually occurs when you have a gentle slope. So on a gentle slope, you're going to find out that a lot of material accumulates there because we see a lot of deposition. Because what happens is that, well, if the slope is going to be gentle, then the water will not have enough energy. And so it ends up being slow. And when it is slow, this material gets dumped and it accumulates there. Okay, so you find a lot of deposition on the lower course. We'll talk about that. So, because the lower course is flat, so gradient here plays a huge role. So whenever you have a flat land or a gentle land, you'll find out that material is being stacked there, it is being dumped there. You see more deposition. But whenever your gradient is steep, you're going to see erosion. So meaning that gradient will determine whether you are going to have erosion or deposition, gradient, and also the volume of water. We'll talk about all of those. Again, these are the three processes that will occur during the river course: erosion, then transportation of that eroded material, and then deposition, the dumping of that eroded material. So, so those are your fluvial processes, guys. As simple as that. It doesn't get any deeper than that, right? So we move on to the longitudinal profile of a river. So within the longitudinal profile of a river, again, a longitudinal profile of a river is a side view, but you really have to know all the processes that occur during the course of the flowing water from the source all the way to the mouth. So we generally divide the longitudinal profile of a river into three parts, and namely the upper course, the middle course, and the lower course. These are also called stages of a river. Okay, upper stage, middle stage, lower stage. So don't be confused by stage. It's the same thing as course. So the upper course refers to the area that is right at the catchment area or close to the catchment area where you have very steep slopes. So it is found upstream. So the gradient in the upper course is generally steep slopes, steep valleys. So you'd find out that if you would look at the cross profiles of the valleys there, they look very steep. Okay. Then you would know that this is in the upper course. You can only find these types of valleys that look like a V shape in the upper course. And the reason why, well, is because you have this type of erosion, which we call vertical erosion. And so by vertical erosion, what we mean is that the river erodes going downwards, or it erodes downward. So this is also called downward erosion. Okay, the river removes material, particularly material that is located on the riverbed. So it removes that material, so it digs going downwards. Okay, so it removes that material. So you can sort of imagine a person that is continuously digging, removing only this material that is on the riverbed. Okay, not removing the material that is on the sides, but continuously removing or digging going downwards. Okay, so that's what we see there in the upper course. We see vertical erosion where the river or the flowing water is eroding going downwards. So it continues to dig such that the valley gets steeper and steeper, guys. And hence we have valleys that look like a V, that are shaped like a V, because of vertical erosion, because of the type of erosion that we get there, which is vertical erosion in the upper course, right? So hence you see V-shaped valleys in the upper course. It's due to vertical erosion, right? So I need you to memorize that for me. You have to know that in the upper course, the type of erosion is vertical erosion. That's the only type of erosion that you are going to get there. And due to vertical erosion, hence you form V-shaped valleys. Okay, so V-shaped valleys are a type of landform that you would only find in the upper course due to vertical erosion. That's what we are saying there. Okay, so that's one landform for you explained. Now, the type of discharge. What about the type of discharge? In the previous video, we talked about river discharge, which is the volume of water that flows past the point. And we said we have two types, turbulent and laminar flow. But in the upper course, we only see turbulent flow, right? So that's the chaotic type of flow characterized by circular motions of water. We said it also results in white water formation. Okay, we'll also talk about that when we are doing rapids. And the other types of landforms that you also find in the upper course are waterfalls and rapids. We'll talk about the formation of waterfalls and rapids in this video, so stay tuned. Right, so we move on. So that is the upper course, the characteristics of the upper course. Have your steep gradient, the type of erosion is vertical erosion, the type of river discharge is turbulent flow, and the type of landforms that you get there, your V-shaped valleys, waterfalls, and rapids. So moving from the upper course, you head on towards the middle course. Now the middle course has a gradient that is between steep and gentle. Okay, so we will rather write here that gradient decreases from the upper course. Now, if I would draw a top view of a river from the upper course, so let's say this is the upper course. So in the upper course, we have very few streams really, and then in the middle course, more streams join the main channel. Okay, so you have more streams joining the main channel in the middle course. So this means that the volume of water increases from the upper course going towards the middle course, because now more streams enter the main course, or more tributaries join the main river channel, and hence a higher volume of water results. Okay, so there's so much water that flows here in the middle course. And so you can imagine the amount of erosion that takes place, because now you have a large volume of water that will flow in the river channel in the middle course. Now, this volume of water, this larger volume of water, will erode the sides. Okay, this is what we call lateral erosion. Okay, you have a higher volume of water in the middle course due to many streams joining the main river in the middle course. And so there's pressure on the sides of the river channel, and hence more erosion is found there. So now we remove material from the sides. Okay, so more material is removed from the sides. More material is removed from the sides, such that the sides retreat and the river channel grows wider and wider. Okay, so it goes back because the water is eating out or removing the materials from the sides. Okay, and so because of this type of erosion that we find here and only here in the middle course, which is called lateral erosion, we see these types of valleys. Okay, look like a U. So we say we see U-shaped valleys. Okay, so U-shaped valleys form due to lateral erosion. It's lateral erosion that results in U-shaped valleys, because the flowing water removes the material on the sides of the river channel, and hence resulting in these sides retreating or moving back. So they will move back. You're continuously removing material, and of course they move back, and hence the river channel becomes wider and wider, forming these U-shaped valleys. Okay, I hope you got that. Right, and now the type of river discharge we have there is actually both laminar flow and turbulent flow. Right, so the landforms you get, of course, we said is U-shaped valleys. You also get meanders. Also have other landforms that we will discuss as well that are not written here. Right, so that's what we see in the middle course. Because of the greater volume of water that flows there, you start to see lateral erosion, sideways erosion, the flowing water eating out the sides of the river channel, and hence the river channel becomes wider and wider and form these U-shaped valleys. Right. So some would say that there is vertical erosion here, but it decreases. What dominates more is lateral erosion. Okay, you can say that is both lateral and vertical erosion, but lateral erosion dominates, and hence we see these U-shaped valleys. And so we head on to the next course, or the next stage, which is the lower course. Now, the lower course will be found, of course, downstream, where the gradient is flat or gentle. Okay, so now here you can imagine water will flow slower. Okay, so there's going to be a lower velocity or lower speed. And what did we say? When water slows down, it tends to damp material. Okay, and so that's why here you do not see any erosion, you see deposition. Okay, because now water slows down due to this gentle gradient, and as it slows down, it releases the suspended material. Okay, suspended material or suspended load is the load that it was transporting, okay, during the course. Okay, that's what we call suspended load or suspended material. Okay, so now it's going to drop or dump this material that it had removed from, of course, that it had removed from the rocks, from the riverbed, the soil, so on and so on. And because now it lost energy, it is going to drop that material. Okay, so that's what we see here. We see deposition here in the lower course because of the loss of energy. And hence, you will see landforms such as deltas, floodplains, wide open valleys, so on and so on. Meanders as well. A meander is simply the bend in a river. Okay, so when a river flows and has these bands are called meanders. Okay, and you will find them in both the middle course and the lower course. And then the type of discharge that you will find here is your laminar flow. Now remember, guys, discharge will be determined by the shape of the riverbed. So if your riverbed is not even, then you will promote turbulent flow. If your riverbed is even, then you will promote laminar flow. Okay, so in the lower course, generally the riverbed is even, and so we see laminar flow. And laminar flow, we say that it is the flow characterized by smooth layers of water. Okay, parallel sheet layers. Okay, and then of course, in the middle course, you have both of these flows because the riverbed can get uneven and it can also get even in the middle course. So that's why we see both type of flows, right? So you should be able to annotate the longitudinal profile of a river on yourself from the start to the end. Okay, all the characteristics of each course, each stage, the types of erosion that you will find, the river discharge, the types of landforms associated. So the gradient along with the volume of water play a huge role in determining the type of erosion that's going to be found in that particular stage, determining the type of landforms that are going to be found there. Okay, and the riverbed will determine the type of river discharge that you're going to have, right? So this is how you should annotate the longitudinal profile of a river, right? Okay, so I hope we made that simple for you. And now we're going to head on to the different types of landforms. We are going to take a look at their formations. So you have a floodplain, natural levee, meanders, oxbow lakes, braided stream, waterfalls and rapids, and also deltas as well. Right, so we start off with a floodplain. So a floodplain is a landform that is found in the lower course of a river. It's simply that open, flat land that is found right next to a river. So if I were to draw a transverse profile of a river, okay, usually you would draw it like that, and then you would have land that is next to the river. This is where people would build their homes. It's called a floodplain because when it floods, the water spills here or it floods right here, okay, on this plain land right adjacent or next to the river, right? So it is a wide flat land adjacent. Okay, adjacent means next. Okay, next to. So wide flat land or open land adjacent to the river that continuously floods. That is simply what a floodplain is. Now, a floodplain forms only due to deposition, a deposition that is caused by flooding. Now, you can sort of imagine this when it floods. Okay, so if it happens that it's going to flood, that means that water is going to flow from the river channel towards the flood plain or towards the land that is next to it. So now what happens is that you are going to remove materials. Okay, so it's going to transport some materials with it. Okay, the flowing water. Okay, so it's going to remove material, particularly coarse material will be dumped. Okay, right next to the river. Okay, so the heavy material will be dumped next to the river, and then the lighter material will be dumped away from the river. Okay, so now you end up forming these layers of silt or layers of fine or light material that are going to be stacked one on top of each other, right? And these are going to make up a flood plain. So floodplain is really caused by simply a deposition of the material from the river to the adjacent land or the land that is next to the river. Okay, so we're saying that during flooding, a layer of silt is added to the adjacent land of the river. Okay, and generally the heavy material is deposited first, meaning which is going to be deposited to the banks. Okay, so the banks, again, we talked about banks, which we said is the ground that is on the edge of a river. Okay, so you'd find that the coarse or heavy material will be found right next to the river, and fine material or lighter material is going to be found away from the river. So those layers of silt will eventually become what we call a floodplain. Okay, so that is the formation of a floodplain, guys. It's not difficult. Okay, so this is simply caused by deposition. We are depositing the material that we have here, depositing next um, to the river or on the land that is close to the river whenever it floods. So continuous flooding will build up these layers and layers of silt or material that is going to be built there. And those layers will eventually form a floodplain. Okay. So that is what a floodplain is. It is the land that is flat, that is next to the river, that is created or formed by the deposition caused by flooding, dumping material there from the river, dumping it next to the land. And these layers and layers of material develop to form what we call the floodplain. Okay, so it's as simple as that, guys, right? I hope you get that. Now, if you were to ask about the course, why would the coarse material be deposited first and then the fine material is deposited away from the river? Well, so if you think about it, it's quite difficult to remove heavy materials over a long distance. And hence, we see the coarse material here, right, on the banks of the river, and the finer material away from the river, because it's much easier for the flowing water to transport these fine materials away from the river. Right, so I hope you got that. Okay, now during this whole process, we said that heavy material is deposited to the banks, right? And the lighter load further away from the banks. Now let's focus on the heavy material part, because this because this results in raised banks. Okay, if you continuously deposit heavy material on the banks, they will result in raised banks, natural banks. Okay, so they will end up forming that structure. Okay, natural bank, which we call natural levees. That is another type of landform that is very much related to how the floodplain occurs. We call it a natural levee. Okay, these are natural raised banks, and they are quite important because, well, when it floods, then the floodplain is protected because you have a raised bank. So the raised bank prevents water from moving through to the floodplain where people might settle. Okay, so that is the natural levee. So this occurs during flooding. Again, it's the same explanation, really. During flooding, the heavy or coarse material is deposited on the banks of the river, or it is deposited first, and continuous flooding of this material forms a natural embankment called natural levee. So natural levee is basically caused by the deposition of heavy material on the banks of the river during flooding. And so continuous flooding will help build more and more of these layers such that they will become raised and hence will be called natural levees. Right, so I hope you got that, guys. Okay, so we move on then to other types of landforms. Okay, and this one is the most common one, which is a meander. Okay, so a meander, we said that you will find that in the middle course and the lower course. Okay, a meander, we said it is a bend in the course of a river. So again, meanders are bends or curves that are found along the course of a river. And, these are really caused by a combination of fluvial processes. They are caused by erosion, transportation, and deposition along a river. So now what happens, as we said, guys, the one distinct difference between the middle course and the upper course is that the middle course has a higher volume of water because of many tributaries joining the main river channel. Okay, and so you see a higher volume of water, and because there's a higher volume of water, now you can think about this. Because there's a higher volume of water, we said that start to see that water will erode the sides. So it will put pressure on the sides, it will remove material off the sides. Okay, so now these sides will end up bulging. Okay, they will end up looking like bands like that because, well, you are continuously removing material there. Okay, you are eating out those sides such that they form these bands. Okay, you are removing that material off there, off these sides, such that they end up forming these bands. Okay, eating out that material, removing that material, and now you end up forming a meander. Okay, so now your river will start flowing like that. Okay, because we see more erosion that is caused by lateral erosion. Lateral erosion occurs, sides get unequal erosion such that one side or one bank or one side of the river channel gets its material removed by erosion, by lateral erosion, and hence forms these bands. It bulges. Okay. And so that's why we end up developing these meanders, these bands. It's due to lateral erosion, guys. And lateral erosion that exists because of a greater volume of water flowing along the river channel. So we're saying here in the middle course, the river has more energy and high volume of water, okay, as a result of tributaries joining. Okay, and so what happens is that lateral erosion starts to widen the channel and the river starts to erode laterally. Okay, so by eroding laterally, it is actually removing these sides, removing materials from these sides, and hence developing these meanders or bends. Okay, because now you're removing material from the sides, and now the sides will start to look like bends. So it forms bands which later on develop into actual meanders. Okay, so that's how you explain the formation of meanders. You have to ensure that you mention the increase in the volume of water in the middle course and the lower course. Ensure that you mention the lateral erosion, which therefore results in the sides bulging or curving because you are removing that material because of the erosion. Okay, removing material such that material from the side in a way that will shape the sides of the river. Okay, shape the channel of the river. Okay, so you form from a straight channel to a meandering channel due to lateral erosion. I hope you guys can get that. Okay, so now if we zoom in here, okay, if we zoom in here, you're going to find out that water now, when water flows, it will hit these sides, continuously hit these sides. These sides, we call them the outside bends, and these the inside bends. That's the inside bend. So when water now is flowing, it will collide with these outside bends, okay, removing material off. Okay, it will continuously remove material off these sides. Okay, or of these outside bands. Remove the material there and move on to remove the material there and move on to remove the material there, so on and so on. So it basically moves in a zigzag kind of movement like that. Okay, so I hope you can get that. So now when water flows, it erodes only one side. That means it will not erode the inside band, it will erode the outside band that it collides with, and erode that outside band, and move on to erode that outside band, and hence we see more erosion on this side. And the material that was removed on this side, it's actually dumped on the inside band. Okay, now if we take a look at the cross section or the cross profile of this, of a river, okay, so the water now will flow towards the outside band. So this is your outside band. Okay, so material will be removed there. Okay, we will remove material off there, of the outside bands. Okay, so we see erosion on that side, and this material that was removed from that slope will be deposited on that slope. Okay, so now you will have layers and layers of sediments being deposited on the opposite slope. On the other slope, we see erosion. On this slope, we see deposition. Just like that. Okay, so we see deposition this side, and on the other side, the opposite side, we see erosion. Okay, so two different processes occurring on either side, right? So now these slopes have names, guys. We don't say this slope and that slope, so we name them. So the slope in which erosion occurs is called the cut off slope. Okay, also called the undercut slope. Well, because when the flowing water gets in contact with this slope, it actually undercuts, or it actually removes material, continuously removing material and making this side steeper and steeper. So you're going to continuously remove materials, okay, such that this slope becomes steeper and steeper, right? Okay, this material will be dumped on that other slope. This other slope where we see deposition is is called the slip off slope. So on the cutoff slope, we see that there is high velocity, water flows at high speeds on this side. And the slip off slope, there's a slower flow, let's say low velocity that you will find there. And we also talk about depth here. So the slip off slope is generally shallow, okay, due to the sediment that lobs there. And then the cutoff slope is deep. Applying these in real life would actually be beneficial to you, because if you know which slope is the slip off and the cutoff slope, it would be much safer to play on this side, okay, because, well, it has low speed of water, and it is also shallow, okay, and meaning which that it is not deep. Whereas on that slope, stepping on that slope would actually be dangerous because it has high velocity, so it can actually carry you away with it, and it is also deep, so it is not safe at all. So know these two types of slopes, and know the characteristics that occur, the type of processes that occur. As we said, the cutoff slope, we see erosion and we see deposition on the slip off slope, right? That is a meandering river for you. You have to know the formation, know how to explain the formation of a meandering river, know the cross profile, as well as the slopes and the different types of processes and the associated characteristics as well, right? So I hope that made sense. Okay, so we move on. Now, another landform that is much connected to the meander is the Oxbow Lake. So, in Oxbow Lake, we even call it a cut off meander. Okay, so Oxbow Lake develop from a meander. There first has to be a meandering river. Okay, so you start having a meandering river like that, right? So this is the river channel. Okay, right. So it looks like that. A meander, as we know, guys, is characterized by these outside bands and inside bands. Now, the area that is between consecutive outside bands, okay, so I have that outside band and the next outside band on the same side. We say that is a meander neck, okay, so we call it a meander neck, right? So, what happens now, as we all know, is that, well, flowing water will erode the outside bands, okay, and we'll see deposition on this side. We'll see erosion on that side, okay. So we see more erosion on the outside band, and again more erosion there, and again, of course, more erosion there, and again, so on and so on. So we see more erosion on the outside bands, okay. So eventually, if we see more erosion on these sides, the meander neck will get narrower and narrower. Okay, so these will start to close up. Okay, so you starting to remove material more frequently on the outside bands, such that the meander neck becomes narrower and narrower. Okay, so it basically empties out like that. So we also see more erosion again on the outside band. Okay, so as you can see, the meander neck is narrowing, and eventually the meander neck or the outside bands, um, especially after a flooding has occurred, water will now take this route instead of flowing around using the main river channel before. So during a flooding, now water will flow straight like that. So as you can see that this meander loop, okay, or this meander will now be cut off from the main channel, such that now we will have something that looks like this. So now you will have a meander that was once part of this river system. Now we no longer have that. Okay, so now you're going to have water that will flow like that, continuing water that will flow straight. Okay, continuing with the bands. Okay, so now water will flow straight. The river channel's shape has now changed. Okay, so that's the idea of the Oxbow Lake. That's how it forms. Okay, so this cut off meander that is now separated or disconnected or cut off from the river system is what we call an Oxbow Lake. Okay, so when it has water, then we call it an Oxbow Lake. When it has dried up, so after it has dried up, then it's going to be called an Oxbow Scar, or a Meander Scar, I mean. It's going to be called a Meander Scar after it dries up, after there's no water. Remember, this is not connected to any other tributaries, and so water will now evaporate eventually, and this Oxbow Lake will now develop into a Meander Scar after it has dried up. Okay, so that's how an Oxbow Lake forms. It forms from a meander due to continuous erosion. So now explaining it, you say, as erosion continues on the outside bands, okay, which are the undercut slopes, the neck of the meander gets narrower and narrower. It will get narrower and narrower because you see more erosion, more and more erosion on these outside bands, such that the neck gets narrower and narrower. And then during flooding, the river now will break through the neck to shorten its course. Now, the river will not want to follow the usual bend. Okay. Now, it will prefer the shorter route, take the shorter route. And so that means that it will flow right on top of the meander neck eroding the meander neck until it forms a new channel. Okay, so now you have formed a new channel. Now this part or that meander loop will be disconnected and it will be left or cut off from the river system. So the cut ends of the meander are sealed by deposition. Okay, and then when the Oxbow Lakes dries up due to evaporation, it forms what we call a meander scar. Okay, now that's how an Oxbow Lake forms from a meander, guys. You have to talk about the outside bands or the undercut slopes being eroded continuously until the meander neck gets completely removed and water flows directly through via the shorter route and hence removing that channel there of the meandering system, right? So that's how the Oxbow Lake forms. That is its relationship with the meandering river. Okay, so now these are four landforms that we went through. We still have four more to do. So a braided stream is a stream that consists of islands of sediment. Okay. Now, when there's a lot of sediment, you find out that sediment will accumulate as lumps or as islands like that. Okay. So you will have these islands right on your river channel. Okay. In the center of your river channel. So in this way, the flowing water itself will be forced to flow in between these islands. Okay, so now water will look for a shortest route flowing in between these channels. So, meaning which the flowing water will separate, divide. Okay, so it will divide and recombine again. So you have water recombining and separating and dividing, converging and diverging. So as you can see that this looks like braids really. So this type of landform in a river system where you see river channels dividing and recombining again between these islands of sediments, that's what we call a braided stream. It's simple as that, guys. Okay, so a stream, this is a stream consisting of multiple islands of sediments and small shallow channels. Right, the streams divide and they recombine again numerous times. So multiple times, forming, so that should be forming a pattern resembling. Resembling means looking like the strands of a braid. Okay, so that is what we call a braided stream. Okay, they form, how do they form? Well, they form at the lower course where there's a lot of sediment that accumulates and forms these islands of sediment, and the flowing water will now be forced to flow between these islands of sediments, dividing and recombining, and hence forming this pattern of braided stream. So they form where the sediment load is deposited as islands or bars between channels. This causes water to split into dividing and converging streams, therefore forming a braided stream. Right, so we move on then from there and we head on to waterfalls and rapids. So waterfalls and rapids, we talked about those. We said they occur in the upper course. Okay, we'll start off with waterfalls. So waterfalls form when a river, after flowing over hard, resistant rock, meets a band of softer, less resistant rock. Okay, so you have water or a river flowing over the hard rock, and then it flows and meets another rock. So you have water or the river flowing over the hard rock. After flowing over the hard rock, flows on top of the soft rock. Okay, so now the river water changes or flows onto a different type of rock in terms of resistance, so a softer rock. So we know that a river erodes a softer rock much faster than it erodes a harder rock. And so we will see more erosion on the softer rock than on the harder rock. Okay, so we will see that this river will eat out the material. It will remove the material of the softer rock, such that the softer rock becomes steeper and steeper, meaning which it will retreat. Okay, by that we mean that it will become like that. Okay, so we are constantly removing the material from the softer rock because it is soft, it is much easier to erode, and hence the softer rock becomes much more steeper. It becomes steeper and steeper, right? Now, the river, because it is soft flowing on the softer rock, it will develop this plunge pool. So, this area here, we call it a plunge pool. So now the river flows onto this plunge pool, and all of this removed material flows onto this plunge pool. Okay, so this will continuously occur such that now the softer rock forms that shape. Okay, so now the softer rock will be eroded such that it will leave the harder rock overhanging. So as you can see, this piece right here, it is overhanging. It is not supported by the softer rock anymore, and it is at a risk of falling, okay, because it is not supported anymore, right? So now heading back to our explanation, we're saying that a waterfall forms when a river, after flowing over a hard, resistant rock, meets a band of softer, less resistant rock. The river erodes the softer rock faster than it erodes the harder rock. Okay, the harder rock is left overhanging, and because it is not supported, it eventually collapses. Okay, so you will have this piece right here falling into this plunge pool. Okay, so it will eventually fall into this plunge pool. By falling, it will help the erosion done by, of course, the flowing river by eroding this softer rock even more. So it will help with the erosion, right? So again, this continues to occur. Okay, water will flow, continuously eroding this softer rock. This softer rock will again retreat backwards, and this piece of hard rock will be left overhanging again, and it will result in falling. So it will fall into the plunge pool again. So as you can see, so this means that this waterfall will actually retreat, move backwards. Okay, and so by retreating on a large scale, that means it is moving up the stream. Okay, the waterfall is moving up the stream, retreating backwards. Okay, so saying that the hard rock is left overhanging, and because it is not supported, it eventually collapses, falls onto the plunge pool, causing more erosion. Over time, this process is repeated again and again, and the waterfall moves and retreats upstream. And rapids are actually like the smaller versions of waterfalls. So rapids look like stairs or steps along a river course. Okay, so they are the smaller scale version of waterfalls. It's really simple how they form because, well, the water goes from a harder rock and flows towards a softer rock, and then onto a harder rock, and then a softer rock. Okay, harder rock, a softer rock. So you can see that these actually look like stairs, right, or steps. That means water will now flow and colliding with these hard rocks. Okay, colliding with these hard rocks. And when water collides with hard rocks, especially if it is flowing at a high speed, it produces an appearance which makes it looks like it is white. Okay, so we say that it is white water. Okay, so water goes from one hard rock to a soft rock. Okay, we say these are alternating hard and soft rocks, and there's a faster erosion, of course, on the softer rock layers, and this creates stairs. Okay, because these softer rocks are easily eroded, so that means that they are going to get their materials eaten out like that. So you're going to have something that looks like that eventually. And this that means this will be rapids. Okay, water will now flow from hard rock to soft rock, hard rock, soft rock, hard rock, soft rock, and that looks like stairs. Okay, so flowing water splashes over and around rocks, forming what we call white water, which is caused, of course, by turbulent flow. And turbulent flow is caused by an uneven bed. As you can see, there's hard rock, soft rock, hard rock, soft rock. So that makes an uneven bed. That's how rapids form. Now we have the last one. So this is the last landform. This we call a delta. Okay. So a delta is a landform that is going to be formed or found at the mouth of a river. So it's actually at the intersection of a river and the sea. Okay. So it is found at the mouth of a river where different channels of the same river flow into an ocean. So you'd find out that towards a river, so let's say that you have a river that was flowing towards the sea. Okay, so this is the sea, and you're going to find out that usually rivers split into different channels towards the sea, and these areas are usually filled with a lot of sediment. Okay, so now this flowing water is flowing, trying to ensure that it flows along a path that is easier to flow on. Okay, so it looks for the easier path to flow on. Okay, that's why you have different river channels splitting there because of the sediment, and water is trying to flow around that sediment, looking for easier paths around that sediment. So that is what we call a delta, really. So because this is in the lower course, water flows slowly. Okay, so the channel splits into several smaller channels and loses velocity. As the river loses velocity, it deposits its load on the riverbed. That's why you see a lot of load there. It's because, well, this is the lower course, the land is flat, and of course, the flowing water slows down. So if it slows down, we said that it releases or it drops or dumps or deposit its load, meaning which it's suspended load. And so here you have a combination of the suspended load and the bed load that is already there. So though all of those are deposited on the mouth, which is where the delta is, okay, producing a fertile alluvial land. So alluvial land or alluvium, so this is taken from alluvium. Alluvium is a type of soil that is very, very fertile, and you find that in deltas due to the dominant deposition that we have there. So now all of these landforms, guys, they play a role in many industries. So for an example, the delta, you can have industries that are going to get their raw materials from here. So sand, gravel for construction. Say they are going to build roads, you're going to need sand, you're going to need gravel. So they get raw materials from these landforms. You can also get tourists coming into these areas there because they are aesthetically pleasing. These landforms also provide fish, and they also help increase the biodiversity. Some of them really help prevent the flooding, such as the natural levees. They provide fertile land, okay, for farming. Your floodplain, it is flat. So there's many impacts that these landforms have if they ever ask you that. Okay, so flatland, you can also talk about settlement. Okay, so settlements can have people settling there because it is flat. This is all of the landforms that you have to know, all the processes, and of course the impacts that I've just stated just now. Okay, so I hope this was helpful, guys. I hope this made everything simple for you, and I really hope that you are going to do your very best in preparation when it comes to the exams. Okay, so that's it for today's episode. Please like, please subscribe, please share, guys. We need this channel to grow. Okay, please do that for me. And I promise to produce even many more videos in a shorter period. Okay, right. So I'll see you in the next episode when we are doing river grading, river rejuvenation, river capture, superimposed, and antecedent drainage patterns.